record.
And we're all set back.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's professional development webinar. This is actually APPAM's last professional development session of 2022, putting your best foot forward, fellowships and grant assistance. So we definitely saved the best for last. Before we begin, I just want to briefly thank Ryan Martz, who's the Membership and Digital Program Manager at APPAM and the APPAM leadership for this series, and my colleagues in the Student Activities Committee at APPAM for hosting the series. And of course, Dr. Cassie Sugimoto, who's the chair of the Georgia Tech School of Public Policy. Without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce our speakers today. First, we'll be hearing from Alsace Gallup, who is with the North Carolina A&T. She is an advisor. Then we'll be hearing from Joseph McNicholas at Duke University, who is a director. We are then going to hear from David Morar at NYU, who's a postdoctoral fellow there. Woohoo, I'm a grad. And Kimberly Olson from the Pew Charitable Trust, a senior officer, and Rachel Pereira from the Brookings Institute, and she is a fellow there. So I look forward to hearing from everyone. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand the microphone over to Alsace.
Thank you, Becky, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm speaking to you today from Greensboro, North Carolina, on the campus of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. And my role at the university is as National Scholarships and Fellowships Coordinator. I work with undergraduate students, graduate students, and alums of our university. And the first thing I will say is I'm going to talk to you on my segment about writing a compelling personal statement. My role on campus is that I help applicants such as yourselves apply for these nationally competitive and prestigious grants and fellowships and scholarships. So my first point of advice when preparing a compelling personal statement for these applications is to find out if there is a representative on your campus in a similar role. There is an organization called the National Association of Fellowships Advisors, or NAFA for short, and many universities in the US have faculty or staff who are members of that organization. And so I will share that link with our organizers later. But if you type in NAF advisors with an O at the end, you should find that website. All right, so you've gotten plugged in, hopefully with somebody on your campus who is paid to help you prepare a successful application. So the next step is your personal statement. A lot of times for national scholarships and fellowships, there's no specific prompt for a personal statement. So a lot of applicants don't know where to start. The actual place to start, in my advice, is to look at both the mission and vision of the organization that is hosting the scholarship or fellowship that you're preparing to apply for, and then to write your own mission statement. Then find out where the overlap between those mission statements lies. And that is going to form a prompt, so to speak, or a set of prompts that you can then respond to in a compelling manner. I tell applicants many times that their personal statement is really a written interview. So you also need to try to anticipate the questions a funder might have. And their ultimate question is, why are you a great investment for our organization? How are you going to help us further our mission? And then how can we help you further your mission? So although it may say personal statement, it may say, tell us about you, you really need to make sure that at the end of your revision process that you have answered that question, why are you a great investment for that organization? How are you going to help them raise more money so that they can fund future scholars? And then how are you going to carry out that work with the funding they provide? So that process, whether you are a great writer or not, is something that can be well attained if you carve out time to actually prepare your personal statement. It should not be something that you do at the last minute, because this is, alongside letters of recommendation, the key motivating factor for reviewers to decide if they're going to invest in you or not. And my fellow panelists are going to talk about different components of the application process and how that all ties in together. But your letter writers, for example, are also going to want to know how your mission ties in with the organization's mission. So it's very important to, of course, find out what programs you're going to apply for, the deadlines, and then I usually advise working backwards and allocating a minimum of 4 weeks to prepare a strong personal statement. So whether you write quickly or not, you need that time for reflection, because a mission statement is not something typically that is come about lightly. It takes time to reflect and refine, and you may do 10 drafts of your personal statement. You should have your letter writers review it for feedback, as well as trusted professors, friends who are very good at noting lack of clarity in statements, or of course, grammatical errors. So all of that takes time. So if you allot at least 4 weeks, that is a great minimum amount of time, but some applicants allot up to 4 months for an application. It really just depends. And then when you are making that case for why an organization should invest in you, you need to demonstrate your track record of involvement. So if you say, I'm passionate about education K through 12 levels for students in the United States, if you have tutored students in that age group, you should write that in your personal statement, even if it's in your resume. You should explain your motivations for wanting to tutor those students and any challenges that you encountered in that process and how you successfully address those challenges. So you cannot just tell, you have to show, as we would say a lot of times as writers. So give examples of what you have done. And a lot of times the qualm is a reader, or excuse me, an applicant may feel that they are bragging by talking about all the experiences that they've had and what they've learned from them, but really you are persuading people who've never met you before in regards to your commitment by showing them how you've been committed in the past. And if you show a reader what you've done in the past and how that has led you to this point and has informed your future direction, that is actually quite persuasive information to share in your application. So to some, because I believe I'm at the end of my time or near that, for our next panelist, identify your organization's mission statement for the grant or fellowship. Identify your own personal mission statement for what you're trying to accomplish, both with that grant or fellowship and in your life. Identify some examples that demonstrate how you've been committed to the mission that you are stating that you have. Acquire a team of faculty, friends, and other advisors who can give outside perspective to make sure you are highlighting your track record accurately, and allot enough time for you to do multiple iterations of your drafts. And that information will put you on a great path to put together a persuasive and compelling personal statement that will hopefully land you in the selection file for your ideal grant or fellowship. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Next, we'll be hearing from Joseph, who will be talking about budgeting and how to find these scholarships, fellowships, and grants in the first place.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Joseph McNicholas. I'm the Director of Research Opportunities at the Sanford School of Public Policy at Duke University. And I have some slides I'd like to share with you. And I'd like to make 4 points about finding funders. The first is active searching. And active searching is when you take your time and go out and look. And one of the best places to find federal grant sources is at grants.gov. By the way, these slides will be available afterwards, so you don't have to write all of this down. Grants.gov for federal sources. The Foundation directory online for private sources. If you're affiliated with an institution, a university, college, what have you, find out what office hosts the subscription to a commercial search engine. Duke subscribes to Pivot, and this provides hundreds of thousands of opportunities from federal, private, state, and other kind of funders. And you can search using Boolean search the way you would at a library, key terms. You can specify dates and locations and all kinds of other parameters that you can set. And also use Google and find out where there might be more topical research sites. I've found one for funding US democracy, for example. These are the elements of creating an active search, but there's also something called passive searching. In some ways, that's more powerful. When you're passive searching, you're letting the world send you the opportunities. So you subscribe to grants.gov at the Connect tab, and they'll send you the announcements. You find the federal agency that is most likely to support your work, the NIH or USAID or whomever it is. You subscribe to their newsletters. You find the foundations, you subscribe to their newsletters, your professional associations newsletters, APPAM's listservs, for example. Let the world send it to you. And then what I do with all these newsletters that come flooding into my inbox is I have them filtered directly into a folder. And on Mondays, Fridays, I get some coffee and I review what I've got, what's in my net that I caught this week. Then I delete some of them. I put them in my spreadsheet, which I'll talk about in a second. I send them out to my friends and colleagues, encouraging them to apply as well. Developing the right habits of thought. You might call this attentional searching. I strongly encourage people interested in getting grants to read the acknowledgements in the research material that you're reading anyway. Right after someone thanks their mentor and their spouse and their dog, they thank whomever funded the work. Take a note of that. When you read through people's CVs, see what kind of funding they got at what stage of their career, so that you know what might be appropriate for you to look for. Have you viewed this APPAM conference sponsor list yet? Because reviewing who identifies the conferences you go to, the websites you frequent, or your academic idols is going to inform your funding applications as well, whether it be for fellowships or for grants. So I recommend everyone keep a spreadsheet or a list of your results. I triage those. I get the funder's name, I get the website. Sometimes I'll keep track of the due dates and the amount, depends how much work I want to put into it. And then I identify each record as, am I going to apply to it? Definitely. Does it need further review, or am I putting it into my maybe someday I'll do that? And then you work that list. Networking is the sort of social searching, you might consider it. And again, you're already doing this work, you're attending this conference, you're attending these talks, you're meeting people in your professional organization. You might look for ways to put your name out there so that people think of you when they find funding opportunities by writing in your newsletter or a journal or a blog, just to get some professional exposure so that others in your network are thinking, yeah, they're a live bulb, let me send opportunities to them. And also, you can look for subcontracting opportunities or offer your subject matter expertise to people who are likely to be applying for grants as well. I've certainly been contacted over the years by people who ask, hey, is someone planning to apply to this opportunity or that opportunity? Would you put me in contact with them? Because I might have skills that they could use in their proposal. That's all I really wanted to say about finding funding opportunities, because there's a lot more to be said. But we have limits on time. I want to talk about the fellowship budget now. I look at budgets as there's closed budgets and open budgets. A closed budget is frequent with scholarships and fellowships. That's where they say, hey, we have $45,000 or $50,000 or $65,000 to pay for a good fellow in this area. And your work is still not done though, because although you know the amount, you don't know yet what it covers. And you'll want to familiarize yourself with what that funding can actually pay for. Is it going to cover healthcare and housing and travel? If the amount is less than your current salary from your institution, will your institution top off your pay to make you whole so that you don't actually have to take a pay cut in order to accept a scholarship or fellowship? Sometimes they don't have money resources, but whoever's hosting that scholarship or fellowship can offer you childcare or transportation or other kinds of options that don't register in dollar amounts. Open budgets. This is what we're more accustomed to usually for grants. This is where you create a true forecast of the costs of your project. And this is sort of the financial expression of the intellectual content that's in your proposal. I recommend everyone to work with their institutional grants managers, because those people are going to help you figure out what are the true direct costs, and also what are those indirect costs that most of us aren't thinking about very often. This is overhead that the university might charge, usually on grants more than on fellowships. But still, there are hidden costs sometimes that we might not know about. This is your opportunity to leave nothing unfunded that needs to happen during your project. And you might want to consider things like how the costs in year one might be different than the costs in year two. There's a lot to know about budgeting, and it's best to talk to the people on your campus about how to do it right. However, there's another side to budgeting that the accountants don't usually think about, and that's the persuasive side. As Alsace was saying, you're trying to persuade your reviewers that you're the person to invest their funds in. And so your budget should reflect the goals of that organization and your own goals as well. And that makes them kind of tricky, but they're great persuasive moments. For example, you want to show them that you're going to spend their money on their goals and priorities. You want to illustrate how you've done a very rigorous planning process to arrive at the figures that you've arrived at. And you want to demonstrate that you've solved some problems, some budgetary problems that might come up. Sometimes you can unlock a hidden value. I had one faculty member who got travel funds to go to research archives, and they got university funds to pay for them to attend the conference at the same location. So they came across as very thrifty for the external funder. An example of spending to meet their goals and priorities is a simple one is, if they're focused on cutting edge research, then your funds should align with cutting edge research. If they're funding professional development and growth of scientific capacity, then that's what you want to align your funding with. And when you mix and match them, you send the funder a mixed signal. So you want to make sure that what you say in your budget aligns with what you're trying to say in your narrative as well. That's the persuasive aspect of budgets. With that, I'm out of time, and I'm going to pass it on to David.
Thanks.
Hello? Awesome. Becky, can I?
Yes, please. I'm sorry. I keep getting kicked off. I'm in a place with sketchy Wi-Fi. I'm so sorry.
No problem. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. So my name is David Marar. I am a postdoc at NYU. I, have been through the rigmarole of graduate school, obviously. And, I wanted to talk to you about sort of the intangibles of fellowships and of grants. I've been fortunate to receive a bunch of grants, but I've also kind of had the real world experience of not getting any, of sort of like not getting a fellowship, of not being, of sort of like just being left in the dust. And I think it's important, like you've heard panelists before, it's important to get things right. And it's important to like put a lot of work into your application and be sort of like by the book. But it's also good to know that not getting a grant or a fellowship is not the end of the world. And it doesn't mean that you're not worthy of other grants or other opportunities, or that you should kind of like, feel bad about yourself. Academia is kind of sadly an industry of rejection. So the first thing I want to say is, look at it as an important thing that you have to do, but do not, don't worry that, you know, your work isn't good, or your, you know, your applications aren't where they're supposed to be, and you're never going to get one if you get a rejection or 2 or 3 or 5. You know, there's a lot of objective reasons why you may not have gotten a grant or a fellowship. And you can work on those, right? And you can sort of like figure them out and go from there. But there's also a lot of subjective ones too. You know, I've been an applicant, like I said, but I've also been a reviewer a bunch of times for you know, for smaller fellowships, you know, reviewer for like slightly bigger things. So, you know, there's a lot more, like has been said so far, there's a lot more than just sort of like getting everything right. And maybe it's genuinely not you, right? Maybe there's somebody that has you know, a better network that then can sort of like, they can leverage the work, or that they have you know, connection into a network that has done the work that you're applying for, or has been sort of like already in this space for a lot more, for a lot, you know, for a longer period of time. So then, you know, you would then have to figure out, how do you leverage your network? How do you broaden your network? How do you make sure that you're connected to the, you know, the general industry, the field, everything that is sort of like adjacent to your work? And the best way to do it, and you know, this kind of feels like I'm doing an infomercial, but one of the best ways to do it is to attend conferences like APPAM. You know, getting a sense of what the of what everybody else is doing, getting a sense of who might be your competition, you know, connecting to them, befriending them, understanding their work can lead to maybe, you know, you and them being competitors on something, but further down the line, you know, the two of you can collaborate on a project that requires you to be sort of like, you know, to work not just at one institution when you're applying, because there's a lot of grants and fellowships that say, you know, we want to fund research that is interdisciplinary and that has more than one institution attached to it. So, you know, building your network that way, connecting to folks, and understanding what the field kind of is doing is very important for, you know, to feed into the sort of like the objective things that you can do to get your application better, which is what, you know, you've heard so far, and you'll hear after me as well. But you know, it's important also to know that you're not alone in this process, and not in the sense of like there's other people applying, but you're not alone because, you know, you're not, as much as academia is kind of like a, you know, a bit more of an individualistic experience of just sitting down and doing your research. You know, you are in, at least hopefully, in a structure where you have a supervisor, a mentor, a chair, folks that you can reach out to. And if you don't have those in a more kind of institutional setting, you know, you can sort of like work towards building a relationship that way with somebody that has been in the field for a while, that has, you know, publications, research that is very similar to yours. And then that way you can gain a very good insight into what the process was for them, right? Where they've applied, what they have as like, you know, experience and lessons and stuff like that. And at the same time, you know, because like I keep bringing up, things may be objective, but that's not the only thing. That's not the only sort of like perspective to things. And, you know, the field may have politics. The field may have, you know, circles. There may be folks whose work is now more revered, whose work is not revered. It's important to know these bits and pieces when you're applying for a grant that is sort of like in your field particularly, rather than just like a grant that says, you know, we want to fund excellence, or we want to like the National Science Foundation does for dissertation grants. So if you're applying for something that's specifically in your field with funders that are well aware of the aspect of the field and all that stuff, it's really, really crucial to think strategically about what your position is, right? Like, you're coming in from a specific research lab or research group. You're in a you're in a position where you might have some negative or positive externalities on where you're coming from. So basically, it's really, really important to understand your position, to understand your network, broaden it, leverage it to an extent, and then sort of build it for the future, but also to position yourself, right, as the best that you can kind of be in that application, and ultimately know that if you didn't get that grant or fellowship this time, there's plenty more. Don't worry about it. It says nothing about your worth or your research's worth. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Kim Olson to take the information that you learned from your networks and hear about her specific experiences with Fulbright and Bosch scholarships and how to secure recommendation letters.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Olson, and I am a senior officer for policy at the Pew Charitable Trust. But I'm coming at this from a bit of a different angle than the others because I'm not in academia. I've never been in academia, and I was always a practitioner. So my early experiences with fellowships were international fellowships because I started out looking at international affairs and diplomacy and became a U.S. diplomat. So I've had a fellowship to work at the German Parliament. I've had a Fulbright fellowship to Austria. I've had the Thomas Pickering Fellowship to study at graduate school. And then I most recently had a fellowship with the Bosch Foundation to bring me back over to Germany. So I'm happy to talk about these kind of fellowships that don't have anything to do with academia if people are interested, during the Q&A. But what I do want to talk about today is about recommendation letters, because these are a huge part of what you're going to be doing if you're applying for a fellowship. And so when you're looking to do fellowship work, usually you're going to see that they want 2, sometimes 3 recommendation letters. And I think that can be the most stressful thing of the entire application process, because it is not in your hands. It is in the hands of another human. So that makes it a little scary. But when you're choosing those recommenders, you want to make sure that they can provide a well-rounded view of you, your background, and your experience, and that they can speak to some of what you talk about in those personal statements that you're working so hard on drafting. And I think the one thing that I always want to tell people to remember is that your most high-profile person is probably not your best recommender. It's generally what people are looking for is that someone that knows your work and knows you. So if you worked for a senator, but you were an intern, the senator is probably not the person that you would like to give you a recommendation letter. You would like your boss to write you that recommendation, because they're going to be able to speak to those qualities and to the work that you did in a more specific way that will help tell your story. So in terms of how to do the letters, I kind of have a 3-step process. So the first thing I would say is make sure you're planning in advance. Taking the time to plan well in advance of fellowship deadlines is going to make both your life and the lives of your recommenders so much easier. These people are, they're professors, they're former and current supervisors, they're busy. So asking for last-minute letters of recommendation is poor form, it's rude, it's disrespectful of your recommender's time, and you're probably not going to get a glowing recommendation out of that kind of late ask. There are always extenuating circumstances, and I'll talk about that in a bit, but they should definitely be few and far between. And if you're planning to apply for more than one fellowship or program, you're hoping to get multiple letters from the same person, it's always best to give them that information up front. They're going to have a better understanding of that time commitment, and it's always easier to sit down and knock out several letters at one time than to come back at it over and over again. This can be hard if the cycles don't align, but it's if you can research this in advance and know how many things you're doing and what you need the letters for, that's going to be very helpful. The second item is that you want to feed the information about the requirements of the recommendation to those recommenders very clearly. Again, recommenders are busy people. And if you email them a dozen times with different pieces of information, chances are something's going to get lost. So you need to lay that information out clearly using maybe an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc and show the name of the fellowship, the deadline, how the recommendation is going to be submitted. Is it paper? Is it email? Is it online form? Are there any specifications? Like, is it a free form letter, or does the recommender need to go to a website and answer specific questions? And then any information that you want that recommender to highlight about your background and skills when they're doing that recommendation. Because again, you want them to talk about something specific. And if you can get your recommenders to kind of focus on different aspects of your background, your skills, that speaks more to your personal statement and who you are. And so when you have all this information in the same place, this is going to expedite the process, and your recommender is going to be very pleased with you. And then finally, I follow up, but do not be a nag. And this is kind of a hard thing to do. So hardest part of the process, the reason all of us will breathe a heavy sigh every time that we see that we need letters of recommendation for some sort of application, because you have to ask yourself, how do you walk this line to stay on the recommender's radar, but not be annoying? And I wish I had perfect guidance for you. Unfortunately, as with anything involving people, this is going to differ depending on the recommender. In the past, I've had good luck discussing the follow-up issue in that original conversation. So when you ask for the recommendation and provide the details in your beautiful Excel spreadsheet or Google Docs, go ahead and ask the recommender how they would like you to follow up with them. Something along the lines of, I genuinely appreciate your taking the time to write this recommendation. I know you're busy. I want to make this easy. The recommendation deadline is X. Why don't I follow up? Why don't I circle back with you 4 weeks in advance of the deadline to see if you need anything from me to complete that recommendation? Something just short, but to the point. Most recommenders are going to say yes. And then you're going to immediately put that date in your calendar with an alert so that you know to go back to that recommender and just follow up with them. And then in your correspondence, you can ask if they need anything from you to complete the recommendation, and note that you will circle back again in 1 week. Then circle back again in 1 week with a similar email with upgrading that language a little bit to a slightly more urgent tone. And then hopefully 2 to 3 weeks out from the deadline, the recommendation is going to be finished, turned in. You'll have sent your heartfelt thank you note, essentially snail mail, to that recommender, and you'll be grateful that it's going to be done. But I will end on this note, because this is always a question. What do you do if a recommender goes MIA? Because this happens. And only you can decide when you're going to cut a recommender loose. I always recommend having an extra 1 to 3 people on your list of possible recommenders for this reason. Sometimes the recommender says yes, and they don't come through, and that's terrible. But you need to have your own backup plan. So if your application is due in under 2 weeks and you have had no response to 2 or 3 overtures to that recommender, it's time to explain that extenuating circumstance to a backup recommender. And most of them will understand, and they're going to come through for you as long as you don't abuse this in the future, because you are asking this busy person to drop everything basically and write your recommendation in a short turnaround. And you want to do something very nice for that person so that you don't, make them feel unappreciated. At the end, I would, though, try and circle back with that original recommender at a later date, because it's possible. I mean, you can hold serious animosity towards someone for perceiving that they blew you off. But it's possible that your recommender had their own extenuating circumstance, and you don't want to burn bridges. But if it does turn out that you have been blown off, probably time to scratch that person off your list of potential recommenders and just move forward without them in the future. And I'll leave it at that until the quick Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you for that great information. And then Rachel is going to close us out with the most important part of all of this, I think, which is how to manage your time and plan ahead, and also to demystify the information and the process just a little bit. So thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Becky. And I feel like my points are kind of synthesizing a lot of the great points that the panelists have made thus far. And, the first thing I want to say is, to a point David made, academia is very much has a culture of rejection. Like, learning to get in, like learning to start applying to grants and fellowships is also a process of learning to get comfortable with rejection. And, you know, it's hard. And I think you really have to, like in some ways insulate yourself because, you know, a lot of these fellowships and a lot of these grants have very low acceptance rates. And so the reality is that there are many, many, many great candidates, all of whom could have won, you know, in different circumstances with a different set of reviewers who had different like preferences or cared about different things, but they didn't. And so, you know, that context is, I think, really critical to keep in mind as, you know, especially graduate students are thinking about applying for grants and fellowships. It's a numbers game in lots of ways, and so you do have to, you know, put yourself out there pretty frequently for something to hit, and oftentimes, you know, you get rejected and it stings. You know, I like to give myself a day to let that sit, and then, you know, try to pick myself back up and think about where we go next with the project. And so that's one point. In terms of how to plan ahead, and you know, other panelists have made similar points, but I can't stress enough the value of giving yourself like 3 times as much time as you think you need. And so, you know, oftentimes fellowships, at least in, you know, for graduate school, dissertation fellowships are, you know, focused on a research project. And so there's like a proposal component and a personal statement component. And so, you know, fleshing out a timeline that will give you lots of time to write multiple drafts of the personal statement and the proposal, the research proposal, is only going to help the chances that you are successful in getting awarded a grant or a fellowship. And so, you know, I would suggest building in lots of time for revisions, and specifically, you know, with the research proposal, building in time to have folks you trust read it and give you feedback. And that can include, you know, your committee members, your advisor, other mentors, you know, graduate school colleagues and friends who you trust. But, you know, getting eyes on it to, you know, help tighten tighten the organization, help you clarify, you know, the motivation for the project is only going to strengthen the quality. And then, you know, a couple of other points on this around planning for your time, or not planning for your time, but thinking about like how to approach applying to grants and fellowships. But this, you know, the second point I wanted to make is that it is often, you know, lots of times grant applications and fellowships are giving you pretty specific directives, but what success looks like remains this kind of like murky idea. And so, you know, something I always tell graduate students, and I did myself, is reach out to folks who were successful, winning those fellowships, winning those grants. Oftentimes you have them in your network, or they are like just 1 or 2 degrees removed from your network, and you can ask those connections to facilitate introductions and see if people are willing to either talk to you or share their materials. I've won dissertation fellowships from the Spencer Foundation and the American Educational Research Association. And when I was going through those applications, I reached out to a number of people who I knew had successful fellowships or fellowship applications to those programs and asked if they would share materials. And, you know, these are people I knew through, again, first and second degree connections, and having that like very tangible example of what success looks like, you know, thinking about how much space do I give to a certain section, things like that, just was like immeasurably helpful in terms of working on my own applications. And so that's one piece of advice in terms of sort of demystifying the process. I think the other piece you want to remember is that, you know, applications that are not funded aren't necessarily like a loss. And I say this because, you know, the process is, you're learning a lot through the process, and you're working on developing your research idea and your personal statement through that process. And a lot of this stuff is so random and they're so competitive, and it's, you know, I can't stress enough how much we shouldn't take this personally when you're not awarded something. But this is all to say that, you know, it's important to remember that you're pushing forward your work regardless of whether you are awarded the fellowship or the grant. And lots of times, another sort of demystifying piece is that lots of times people will apply to fellowships and grants multiple times before they're awarded something. I applied to the Spencer Foundation once and I was outright rejected. The second time I made it through like the 2 rounds and was awarded. And so, you know, which is one example, but I've heard plenty of other examples of people being awarded fellowships and grants after multiple attempts. And so I think that's another piece to really keep in mind as you're thinking about, you know, applying for fellowships and grants and thinking about, you know, trying to build up financial support for your research. And so, you know, if you apply once and you're not accepted, put it on your calendar and think about resubmitting an application. And now you have lots of time to plan ahead, to implement lots of the great advice that other panelists have given. And the last piece I'll say, which, you know, may sound obvious, but I like to always stress this to graduate students anyway, is that, you know, you should be applying to fellowships and grants. And you will never win a fellowship and grant if you don't apply, which, you know, is obvious and an obvious statement, but I think that there's a lot of fear around going through the process, fear of rejection, and it is time consuming. Like these putting together these application packets takes a lot of time and you need to budget time for it. This isn't something, you know, to be an afterthought or to, you know, save for the end of the day. This should be a priority. And be reflected in how much time you spend and in terms, you know, overall and on a day-to-day. But this is all to say it's worth spending the time, and the more you put yourself out there, the more likely something is going to hit. And so I encourage folks to, you know, just start getting in the game of looking for funding, because, you know, that's the reality of graduate school. And for many of us in the research world, it's our reality post-graduate school. So it's good practice.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. All right, I'm going to suggest that we don't have any questions in the Q&A right now, which doesn't mean that you all don't have questions. But I'm going to suggest that you all put the gallery view on if that's not how you already have it. And then I'll invite all the speakers to their videos back on. And I'm just going to pause for a minute and see if anyone, well, first of all, let's have a round of applause for our speakers. So you can put that in your reactions and you can, don't we have reactions? Isn't that a thing? I don't know. Do y'all see reactions? We can't even see the participants. So on behalf of all the people listening out there and the future listeners, because it's recorded, I just want to thank you all very much for your expertise. I can see that you all have come a long way in a hard road, applying for fellowships and scholarships and grants. So thank you so much for your expertise. Let's just pause for a few minutes and see if any of the participants have any questions. You can raise your hand, attendees, or you can just unmute, or you can, raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or you can put your question in the chat or in the Q&A section. And we're just going to sit here for just a minute. In less than a minute. Okay. I don't see any yet. So let me just go ahead and ask a couple of questions that I have off top. First of all, one of the themes I heard coming out from you all is that this is just not a solitary process. It's going to be funding for one person, for the work of one person or the scholarship of one person, but you've got to network and figure out what other people are doing. You've got to look through CVs and you've got to find, you know, of course, some of the work is by yourself on your computer. A lot of it is by yourself on your computer, but you've got to get recommendations. You've got to get advice. You need to get people to read your materials that you trust. You might need to reach out to your mentor or your chair or your professor, your advisor to say, hey, I have this list of websites, I've come through it and, I've found like 10 that I think they're good. What do you think of these? And maybe your professor's like, oh my gosh, this one place, they're really responsive or something. So it's not a solitary process. So it does seem maybe overwhelming. And it's obviously, you want to spend plan to spend times more than you expected, plan backwards, calendar out from the deadline. You want to apply before the deadline if possible. So I guess my question is, it seems like a lot, you all. It seems, really, even it's been demystified.
Becky, could I add something to what you're saying?
Oh yeah, please.
I was very jealous of Kim, who doesn't have to work through institutions. That's lovely. But one of the things I've noticed that's tripped up some of the grad students that I've worked with is that they didn't anticipate that their university might need to have weeks of time added to the process themselves to review and approve the proposal. And that is especially the case if the award is going to be made to the university and pass through to the applicant. So just something else to be aware of. Now you've got your writing timeline, your letter writer's timeline, a budget timeline, and a bureaucratic timeline. Just wanted to add that thought.
No, thank you so much for adding that. In fact, even more reason to go to someone that you trust in your university and ask them, hey, on a given day, like, what's your process for grant writing? Considering that there's this university bureaucracy, and your budgeting, so that, they'll be able to tell you, I'm sure there's, your university has a website that says this much, percentage has to come off, and everything like that. But you're like at Georgia Tech, we have an institute, but we also have a school within the Institute of Public Policy. And so public policy might have its own, designs around that. I don't know. So, I would say the first step is, comb through the list of websites that Joseph shared, get some idea of what you want to get funded for. Is it for scholarship? Is it for your research? And then also ask your advisor, they are familiar with what your research is, and so they might also have some specific places that you might want to apply. So I just want to ask anyone of you, actually, it'd be great maybe if all of you could answer this question briefly, maybe like a quick success story. If anyone who has applied has a success story who can just share like the timeline or like, what I'm saying, like what you did from A to Z, just like brief, and like how long it took, because, some people are funded, for their research already through the schools. They might not be thinking, oh, well, I might be doing research for 2 years post the availability of funding from my school. And so some people might not even be thinking about the need to do this. So if anyone has just like some personal stories, I think would just be really helpful.
I can start because I feel like it's a personal story of growth. So the first time I applied for a big fellowship was for a dissertation fellowship, and it was after getting I was not going to apply originally, and then I got access to the data I needed to like do the research project that I wanted to do, my dream research project. But it only gave me a 6-week runway to get everything together, get my letters together, get the proposal, get the personal statement, and it was a mess. It was a very rough 6 weeks. I ended up submitting something that I felt okay about, but I didn't leave in enough time for all of the other little pieces, because lots of these applications also have or at least the Spencer fellowship has like small 100-word questions with the application process on top of your personal statement and your research statement. And so by the time I was submitting, it was a scramble and I wasn't awarded, which I wasn't surprised by. And so I reapplied the next year. I started 3 months in advance. I had time for lots of feedback on my proposal. I had lots of time to finesse all of the other supplemental material that was required and get feedback from other people. And I had solicited example materials. I felt like I really came in prepared, and that application was successful. And so, it was a positive learning experience, but I can't stress enough like how much time needs to go into stuff like this.
And I'll just pop in to kind of piggyback off of what Rachel said. I think that's a really great example from an advisor perspective of what the reality is. A lot of times applicants are very sure about what they want to do, but they either learn about the opportunity close to the deadline or something falls through. Murphy's Law, you know, whatever can go wrong will happen. But as an advisor, a lot of times the value of applying is not only the financial value if you're selected, but the value of being prepared for the next opportunity that's going to present itself. Once you have done a fairly rigorous application, that gives you a great foundation to then be poised for future applications. So you can't really lose when you are applying for one of these fellowships or grants. So the best advice I would say is to just get started. If you see something you really wanted, even if the deadline is close, you know, be cautious about the letter of recommendation side, because those are maintaining relationships that you need to maintain. But if it's something where it's someone who has written a letter before and you have frequent conversations, and so all the information that Kim shared earlier, you may be able to apply then if it's a short timeline. But especially if it's something where maybe you're not actually going to submit it, but you want to go ahead and get your materials together, do that, because I won't say it's a guarantee, but, and I believe Joseph talked about this, there are passive ways for people to share information about what's coming up. And you never know when those deadlines are going to be, because you don't even know that they exist yet. And so being prepared ahead of time, thinking through how you want to describe yourself, getting over any initial discomfort and talking about yourself is really important. Making sure that people who would write you letters actually know what you want to talk about. A lot of times you think they know, and they know, but they also know about 50 other people. So you need to send them reminders, but really just going for it, I would say is the typical track record. I've worked with students who learned about an opportunity 2.5 weeks before a deadline, and it was an intense application, but they were a great fit. So they had already kind of thought through their mission statement about what they wanted to do. And then they were able to, through much sweat and tears and frustration and worry, get selected. So it can work out, but it might not, but you will still be prepared for something in the future, as Rachel has very wonderfully shared.
Okay, those are great stories. That was really helpful too. And one of the things that you just said, Rachel, Alsas, was just that you going into this, knowing what you want to do is actually like a pre-step, you know, I mean, you know, having your, whether it's your dissertation planning or, you know, your research planning, I'm sure you don't have to have gone through like an IRB process, but it just seems like know who you are and know what you want to do. Oh, thanks, Joseph. Know who you are and what you want to do, and then find that match. And then when you're, you know, look at the application, if they're all about like sustainability, and you're interested in sustainability and this through like the lens of climate change, you know, use their language so they understand what you're talking about. So you always look to and try to mirror what they're saying with what you're writing with how they understand things. Okay, let's look at this question. Anonymous, are all of these fellowships and funding exclusively for PhD students? I have a master's and I am a master's student and I'm working full time. What are some opportunities for people just really passionate about research? Any tips on seeking funding for independent research or reaching out to professors for co-authoring research? Thanks for that question. Anyone want to tackle that?
I'll tackle the first half of that, since, you know, I don't have a PhD. I don't intend to get one, but I have had multiple fellowships. And I think a good place to look for those kinds of fellowships, there's a website called ProFellow, and they have a ton of fellowship opportunities that are like all over the map. I mean, really, like you can filter it down to, I only want to be 3 months, and I want to be like going overseas, or I want to be domestic, like, or on certain like issue areas. Like they have a ton of things there. So it's totally worth the time to spend some time on that website and look for those fellowships. But you know, like there are fellowships for basically everything, as long as you spend some time looking for them.
And I'll piggyback on that, Kim. So I put in the link again that Becky shared about National Association of Fellowships Advisors. So Pro Fellow, I think most of the resources are free, but all the information that they've shared is also on the NAFA website, and that also comes with an advisor. And so I will put that plug in there. I will, full disclosure, I'm on the executive board for NAFA. So we definitely want to make sure that students know that they probably have a staff member who's already getting paid to help them apply for, learn about and apply for these programs. And some universities actually have a list of the ones that they work closely on as far as fellowships and scholarships, and will tell you if they work only with undergraduates or with master's level students, or all graduate students only, or all students or alums, or a combination of all of that. And so I have a similar listing on my website. So that's, I think, to the point of building your team and building a community, you want to see if there's someone already getting paid whose job it is to help you find these fellowships and scholarships and then to apply. So you can definitely look at Pro Fellow, but I also would encourage you to find someone at your university who can assist you on a more frequent basis as a personalized experience.
Does anyone else want to respond? We have, I would say, maybe 30 seconds left, and then I'd like to spend the last 30 seconds plugging the conference. Anyone else? Okay, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up. I just want to thank the panelists again so much for your expertise and your time with all of us today. And I hope that lots of grant dollars and scholarships and fellowships come out of this conversation. To the attendees, I'm sure you can just Google each of the, we didn't put links in for everyone, but I'm sure you can Google their names and they have bios, and you can see the work that they've done, and you can send them more flowers to celebrate their work, and to also see, you know, where they got their funding. And I'm sure anyone would be happy to hear from an APPAM member asking questions. Like, they were so generous. So I just want to say thank you all so much. This has been a pleasure talking with you. And thank you, Ryan. And I guess, does anyone have, what's for, but feel free to say, shout out one word, one little goodbye word that you're feeling or thinking about.
I just want to say thank you all to all these panelists. This was actually a very interesting session today. I'm glad. I know we tried to fit in a lot of speakers today, and I think it went really well. I'm going to share the recording with each of you, and we will be putting this recording online here shortly as well. Joseph, I think, wants to share some slides with it, or will at least share them in the recording. But again, thank you all for joining. Thank you for participating. If you want to learn more, come join us at the conference. Registration is open, and that is in November.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Have a great day.